Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. Today we're going somewhere pretty fascinating. We're going back in time to explore a story that might just completely change how you think about colonial history.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. We're going to be talking about the Dinka people's resistance against British rule in South Sudan.
Okay.
So picture this.
Yeah.
You've got cattle herders armed with spears, and they're successfully repelling the British Empire.
Wow.
Not just once, but on multiple occasions.
That's incredible.
I know, right? It's like a real-life David and Goliath story.
Totally.
And by the way, if you're new to the deep dive and you're enjoying this kind of exploration of history, science and culture, make sure you hit that subscribe button on our YouTube channel.
Yes.
And click that little notification bell so you don't miss out on any of our future episodes.
Yeah, we've always got something new and interesting coming up.
We do.
Really exciting stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so let's dive into this story. It's truly remarkable, one that kind of makes you rethink those power dynamics of the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What makes the Dinka resistance so compelling is their really deep connection to the land and how skilled they were at traditional warfare.
Right.
That's really what gave them the edge against a force that actually had superior weapons.
Yeah, you would think that would be the deciding factor, but it wasn't.
Nope.
So, okay, let's set the scene. It's South Sudan in 1919. The Dinka Aliab people, who were known for their strength and skill with spears, lived a life really intertwined with their cattle in the region west of the Upper White Nile River. Can you give us a bit more detail about their daily life and how that kind of clashed with the incoming British administration?
Sure. Imagine a society that had almost no familiarity with Western customs.
Really?
Like clothing, or even like a centralized system for taxes.
Oh.
Yeah. The Dinka Aliab, they lived in a very decentralized way, relying on cattle herding for their food and also for their social structure.
Yeah.
They had their own complex systems for government and justice, very different from the British understanding of the world.
So basically, two completely different worlds collided.
Yeah, exactly.
So while the Dinka were living their lives, Sudan was under this Anglo-Egyptian rule, but as we mentioned before, it was really the British calling the shots, right?
Yeah, exactly. The British, they had all the top administrative positions. They were overseeing the taxes and putting all these colonial policies in place.
So they basically saw the Dinka as people they could rule and exploit for labor, right?
Yeah, and they often ignored or just misunderstood the existing social structures and customs that the Dinka had.
Wow. So it sounds like a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
Was there also a big language barrier?
Oh, absolutely. The British representatives a lot of times didn't speak Arabic or Dinka, the languages the local population spoke.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, and this lack of communication really created this huge gap of misunderstanding, making it almost impossible for the British to understand local grievances or respond effectively to the rising tensions.
So we have this clash of cultures, this system of exploitation, and basically a complete communication breakdown. No wonder things got out of hand. So tell me about this leader who rises up in this situation, Kon Anok Nyengeer.
Okay, so Kon Anok, he was a Dinka Aliab leader who was really fiercely opposed to British colonialism. He saw the injustice of their tax system and recognized it as a form of exploitation, He quickly became a symbol of resistance for the Dinka.
And it wasn't just quiet discontent, right? There were actual uprisings.
Oh, yeah, for sure. In October 1919, under Kon Anok's leadership, a force of something like 3,000 Dinka Aliab warriors launched this surprise attack on the British police post at Mingkaman, that's also known as Boulier, near Bor. This wasn't just violence, it was a calculated move against a key symbol of British authority.
3,000 warriors. That's insane. It sounds incredibly coordinated for a supposedly decentralized society. It really shows how united they were and how strong their grievances were.
Right, it's pretty amazing.
And it gets even more interesting.
Oh, yeah.
At the same time, the Mundari tribe, who live south of the Dinka, they also launched their own attack.
Yeah.
They targeted telegraph lines and other police posts.
So there was some level of communication and coordination between tribes against the British.
Exactly. It wasn't just one group acting out of frustration. It was a coordinated resistance movement across different tribes, all pushing back against a common enemy.
So what helped them succeed in the beginning? I mean, we're talking about fighting the British Empire with spears.
Well, the Dinka and also the Mundari, they had this huge advantage. They knew the terrain like the back of their hand. It wasn't just about knowing the land. It was about understanding all the little details. The tall grasses, which were perfect for ambushes, the hidden paths, great for strategic retreats. They were masters of their environment. And the British, with their more conventional military tactics, they really underestimated that. Yeah, and we can't forget about how skilled they were with spears.
Of course not.
I mean, generations of cattle herding and conflicts between tribes probably made them incredible fighters in a way the British just couldn't match in those first encounters.
Absolutely.
Oh.
Their spear fighting techniques were really effective, really deadly. They used their agility and their knowledge of the terrain to outmaneuver the British troops, attacking from unexpected angles and then disappearing before the British could retaliate.
It's like a combination of guerrilla warfare and just an incredible understanding of their environment.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable.
So tell us about one of their most significant victories against the British, the December 1919 ambush.
Okay, so the British, led by Captain Stigand, they set out to put down the uprising. They were super confident in their weapons, but they walked right into a trap. Picture this. British troops moving through tall grass, totally unaware of the Dinka warriors hiding all around them. And suddenly, boom, about 1,000 Dinka warriors launch a surprise attack.
Oh, wow. That must have been terrifying for the British troops. What happened?
It was a total disaster for the British. Captain Stigand, another British officer, an Egyptian captain, and 24 soldiers and porters were killed. This wasn't just a tactical victory for the Dinka, it was symbolic. They had defeated a group led by higher-ranking officers, proving they could take on the British at what they thought was their strongest.
It was a turning point, wasn't it?
Definitely.
The Dinka showed how smart they were in terms of strategy, and they humiliated the British, ruining their image of being invincible.
Totally. This win really shook the colonial administration. The remaining British troops, who were led by Major Frank Crowther Roberts, they had to retreat while fighting. Just think about that. One of the most powerful empires in the world, forced to retreat by a group of cattle herders with spears. It really shows the Dinka's courage and strategic thinking.
Yeah, it really does.
It's quite a story.
It is. And this definitely sets the stage for us to learn more about what happened next. We'll look more into the British response and what happened to the Dinka resistance in Part 2.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the Dinka people's resistance. Last time we left off with the Dinka handing the British a pretty big defeat.
Yeah, forcing them to retreat. It really messed with their idea that they were unstoppable.
Right. That December 1919 ambush really showed how well the Dinka knew the land and how good their strategies were.
For sure. But I can't imagine the British just let that slide. How did they respond?
Well, as you can guess, the British response was fast and brutal. They were humiliated,
Yeah.
and determined to show who was boss, so they launched a Scorched Earth campaign to crush the rebellion.
Scorched Earth. What did that involve? Did they change their tactics?
Yeah, so a British officer named Darwall, he was put in charge of the counteroffensive,
Okay.
and he set up his base at Pap, which was a strategically important spot for the Dinka.
Right.
From there, they launched a ton of attacks, not just against Dinka warriors, but targeting their whole way of life.
So it wasn't just about winning battles anymore. It sounds more like they wanted to break the Dinka spirit and destroy what held their society together.
Exactly. They went after the Dinka's livestock, which was their main source of food and the foundation of their society and economy.
Awful.
They destroyed villages, forcing families from their homes and disrupting their way of life. This scorched earth policy was a classic colonial tactic, aimed at causing so much suffering that resistance seemed impossible.
It's a chilling example of the brutality used by colonial powers. Do we have any idea how much damage they did to the Dinka?
The historical records show a lot of casualties and widespread destruction. Hundreds of Dinka, Atuat, and Mundari people were killed in the fighting and the chaos that followed. Their homes were destroyed, their cattle stolen or killed, their land left in ruins. It had a devastating impact on the Dinka, how they lived, how they took care of themselves.
A tragic turn of events, especially considering how successful they were at first. What about Kon Anok? What happened to him during this counteroffensive? Did he keep leading the resistance?
Unfortunately, Kon Anok's story ends tragically. After leading the Dinka to those initial victories, he was poisoned, most likely by British agents trying to eliminate the leader of the resistance.
What a heartbreaking end for a leader who fought so hard for his people and their way of life. It shows how far the British were willing to go to crush any opposition. Losing their leader that way must have been a crushing blow for the Dinka.
It absolutely was. Kon Anok's death, along with the brutality of the Scorched Earth campaign, marked a turning point for the Dinka resistance. While they did continue to resist in various ways, the loss of their leader and the widespread devastation made it much harder to keep fighting the British Empire.
It really highlights the complex and often tragic nature of resistance movements. Even with early wins and great strategies, the Dinka were up against an enemy with way more resources and who were willing to use incredibly ruthless tactics.
It's a key point to keep in mind when we look at colonial history. Often the story focuses on European power and technology. But stories like the Dinka resistance show us that indigenous people fought back, often with incredible courage and ingenuity, even when the odds were completely stacked against them.
Their story makes us face the harsh realities of colonialism, the unequal power dynamics, and the terrible impact on indigenous communities. It reminds us that history is never simple, and that even in defeat, there's amazing bravery and resilience to be found.
Absolutely. And it's important to recognize that the Dinka's resistance didn't just disappear after Kon Anok's death and the Scorched Earth campaign. They found other ways to resist, changing their strategies to fit the situation. They did things like sabotage, refused to pay taxes, and held onto their cultural traditions even though the British tried to suppress them.
That shows real strength and determination to keep their identity despite being oppressed. We often think of resistance as just military action, but the Dinka show us that it can be many things, from armed conflict to holding on to cultural traditions. So what were some of the lasting effects of this resistance? Did its impact go beyond the immediate conflict?
The Dinka resistance, although it was eventually put down, left a permanent mark on the history and collective memory of the region. It became a symbol of Dinka strength and resilience, something that would inspire future generations as they continue to face the challenges of colonial rule and later the fight for independence.
So even in defeat, the Dinka's fight planted the seeds for future challenges to colonial power. It's a powerful reminder that acts of resistance, no matter how small or unsuccessful they seem, can have a lasting impact and inspire others to keep fighting for freedom and self-rule.
And their story makes us think critically about how we understand history. Who tells the story? Whose voices do we hear? And whose are silenced? The Dinka resistance reminds us to look for those often forgotten stories of resistance and to recognize the courage and cleverness of those who fought back against colonialism, even when things seemed hopeless.
It's a call to look at history from different angles and to understand the complex relationship between power, resistance, and the survival of cultures.